James Wilson clutched his coffee thermos tighter as the train lurched forward, the morning commute already testing his balance. At 34, the former Army Ranger had mastered navigating civilian life with his carbon fiber prosthetic leg, a permanent souvenir from an IED explosion in Afghanistan. But rainy days like today made the socket rub uncomfortably against his residual limb. The persistent drizzle had soaked through his pants, adding an extra layer of discomfort where the prosthetic met his skin. As James eased into a priority seat with visible relief, he noticed a businessman quickly avert his gaze, that familiar mix of curiosity and discomfort that James had grown accustomed to. 3 years since his medical discharge, and he still felt the weight of those stares more than the titanium attached to his body. He shifted in his seat, adjusting the prosthetic to alleviate the pressure points that were already beginning to form. The damp weather always amplified the phantom pain, invisible sparks of agony shooting through a limb that no longer existed. The train swayed as it rounded a bend, and James instinctively gripped the handrail. His physical therapist would be proud of his reflexes at least. He pulled out his phone, smiling at a text from his fiancée, Melissa. "Don't forget dinner with my parents tonight. Dad's making that chili you love." A bright spot in what promised to be a challenging day at the ET firm where he'd been working for the past 18 months. The normalcy of worrying about impressing his future in-laws felt like a gift after everything he'd endured. Outside, the city landscape blurred past. Office buildings standing tall against the gray sky, their windows reflecting the clouds like mirrors. 3 more stations passed, the train car filling with the usual symphony of morning commuters, typing, coughing, the occasional laugh at a podcast. A young mother struggled to calm her fussing toddler while an elderly man dozed with his chin tucked against his chest, newspaper folded neatly on his lap. James pulled a bottle of pain medication from his jacket pocket, discreetly swallowing a pill. The movement caught the attention of a teenage girl sitting opposite him, her eyes darting curiously to his leg before quickly returning to her phone. James was used to this dance. The dances, the questions people wanted to ask but didn't. Sometimes he wished they would just ask outright instead of stealing glances when they thought he wasn't looking. He closed his eyes, letting the gentle rocking of the train lull him into a moment of peace. His mind drifted back to the military hospital in Germany, where he'd spent 6 months learning to walk again. The memory of his first steps with the prosthetic was still vivid, the mixture of triumph and grief, the realization that nothing would ever be the same. His unit had sent him videos of them completing their tour, standing in the exact spot where he had fallen. They had planted a small American flag there, a private memorial that meant more to him than any official commendation. The train announcer's voice crackled over the speakers, listing the next 3 stops in a monotone that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. James checked his watch. 20 more minutes until his stop. He reached down to massage the area above his prosthetic, trying to stimulate circulation and ease the growing discomfort. That's when a sharp voice cut through his thoughts like a blade, shattering the mundane tranquility of his morning routine. "Excuse me." The voice belonged to a meticulously dressed woman in her 50s. Designer sunglasses perched on her highlighted hair, her expression a portrait of entitlement. "Those seats are reserved for people who actually need them." The car fell silent as passengers looked up from their phones. James explained politely that he qualified for priority seating, but the woman's perfectly lined lips curled into a disbelieving smirk. "You young people think you're entitled to everything. I've seen your type before, pretending to be disabled for attention." Her voice grew louder with each accusation. 2 teenagers across the aisle exchanged uncomfortable glances while an elderly man shook his head disapprovingly. James felt heat rising in his chest, not from embarrassment, but from a familiar anger he'd worked through in therapy. He'd fought for his country, lost friends in combat, endured countless surgeries, and now had to justify his invisible disability to a stranger. "Ma'am," he said with practiced calm, "I don't need to prove anything to you." The woman's eyes flashed dangerously as she pulled out her phone. "We'll see what transit security has to say about this fraud." What happened next occurred so quickly that passengers would later give conflicting accounts to transit police. The woman lunged forward, declaring she would expose James, and grabbed his pant leg with such force that several people gasped. "See, I knew it," she exclaimed triumphantly as the fabric revealed the unmistakable metallic gleam of his prosthetic limb. But she didn't stop there. Her manicured fingers actually gripped the prosthesis itself and pulled, causing James to cry out in genuine pain as the socket twisted against his sensitive skin. A college student captured the entire incident on her phone, while a nurse from a nearby hospital rushed to James's aid. "Are you out of your mind?" the nurse shouted at the woman, whose righteous indignation was rapidly morphing into horrified realization. The train screeched to an unscheduled stop as the emergency button was pressed. Through the windows, passengers could see transit security running toward their car. The woman, suddenly aware of the dozens of shocked faces and multiple phones recording her actions, backed away, stammering about how she was just trying to protect the rules. James, wincing as he readjusted his prosthetic, looked her directly in the eyes and said words that would later be quoted in newspaper headlines. "Did pulling my leg make you feel better about yourself?" The video of the incident went viral before James even reached his office. #respect to our vets and #invisible disabilities became trending topics across social media platforms. The woman, identified as Patricia Holloway, a real estate executive, was escorted off the train by security while passengers applauded. By afternoon, James had received calls from 3 veteran support organizations, 2 morning talk shows, and surprisingly, Patricia's son, an active duty Marine, who was devastated by his mother's behavior. 3 days later, in a twist that media outlets called remarkable, James agreed to meet Patricia at a veterans rehabilitation center. Cameras captured their tense initial interaction, which evolved into a tearful apology from Patricia and a conversation about prejudice and assumptions. The Transit Authority used the incident to launch a powerful public awareness campaign about invisible disabilities, featuring James as a spokesperson. 6 months later, Patricia was volunteering weekly at the same veterans center, helping with administrative tasks while slowly earning redemption. And James, he started a support group for veterans navigating civilian spaces with prosthetics. At their first meeting, he shared how a horrible incident on a morning train had unexpectedly created a platform for change, proving that sometimes when people try to expose you, they end up exposing only their own prejudice, and in the process, creating opportunities for education that might never have existed otherwise.